Sometimes I even felt like I would kind of, you know, talk to this majestic tree, that I kind of would anthropomorphize this tree, that it could listen to me and maybe kind of help me sort out some of my problems.
I understand that toward the end of your time in graduate school, your longtime girlfriend broke up with you. Tell me what happened and the effect this had on you.
Yeah, it was very difficult. I'm sure a lot of people have experienced difficult breakups, but it was, one of my more serious relationships. Maybe I thought this would be a very long-term, relationship, possibly somebody that I could marry to. So that was important, to me. And I was seeing friends of mine that were getting married or buying houses or, having kids. They all seemed to be kind of passing me. So it was a very kind of hard time. A lot of things compounded where it did seem like, a lot of my friends were passing me by and I was kind of stuck still maybe being a kid, not really having grown up yet.
I'm wondering how you dealt with this breakup and whether nature played any role in you finding yourself.
Well, it certainly did. I immediately went to Barton Park and looked for that big oak tree to share my sorrow and try to see if that oak tree could heal me a bit.
Standing beneath the majestic branches and the gently rustling leaves, Mark confided his sorrows to the tree.
I basically said, it's over with me and Heather. Now I've got to move out and find a new place to live. I'm single, I don't have much money, and I'm nearly 30. My friends are buying houses, they're getting married, having kids themselves. I just felt like a loser and, kind of thinking, what am I doing wrong?
What was the effect of saying this to the tree?
Well, initially it didn't help too much, but I think it felt good to get it out. When you're in front of majestic nature, and to me this tree was fairly awe-inspiring, it does sort of make your problems feel a little bit smaller, that we're part of something larger, and the vastness of nature can make us feel small, but I think in a good way, where we realize, we're part of something bigger. And, while I certainly was not feeling good at the time, that it would pass and I would get back to being myself again.
Sometimes when I'm out in the woods and I see one of these trees that's been around for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, I can't help but think about all the things that this tree has seen and all of the historical events that it's witnessed. I mean, there are trees around that are 200 years old, and you realize that they have seen and been around so much. And in some ways, as you talk to the tree about your breakup, you're putting things in perspective, not just spatially, but also in a question of time.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And also, too, that you're describing these trees that can be so old. They do kind of have sort of the wisdom of a grandparent. It seems like, they have deep roots. They have a long history. It seems like there is some wisdom that's contained in these trees.
An artist finds relief from his roiling emotions and destructive drinking alongside a creek in rural Long Island. Military veterans recover from trauma as they surf the waves of the Pacific. And a scientist finds that in the midst of stress and heartbreak, a tree can provide the soothing support he needs. What is it about being outdoors that soothes and heals us, allowing us to become focused and productive? When we come back, the science behind the power of nature to restore our minds. You're listening to Hidden Brain. I'm Shankar Vedantam. This is NPR.
Seattle International Auto Show, November 14th through 16th at Lumen Field. EVs, new car technology, research, and test drives. Hosted by Washington's franchised auto dealers and VECU. Ticket info at seattleautoshow.com/tickets.
Should Washington's long-term care insurance program be playing the stock market? It's one of the questions that might have voters scratching their heads. On the next Sound Side, we'll demystify all sorts of last-minute questions about the November 4th election. Be ballot ready. We'll see you Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. right here on KUOW.
48 degrees in Seattle's University District at 9:24.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy and helping clients find balance. Clients are matched with one of 30,000 therapists for online therapy from anywhere at betterhelp.com/public. From Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for use in restaurants and home kitchens around the world. Their cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
This is Hidden Brain. I'm Shankar Vedanta. Have you had experiences in nature that have proved restorative or cleansing? If you have a story about a time in your life when the great outdoors proved helpful to your inner state of mind, please find a quiet room and record a short voice memo. Email it to us at ideas@hiddenbrain.org. 2 or 3 minutes is plenty. Please use the subject line, nature. Mark Berman is a psychologist at the University of Chicago. For many years now, he's been interested in the science of why nature seems to help our minds. Mark, one of the leading lights in your field is a man named Roger Ulrich. When he was a teenager, he was often sick. How did he turn to nature to help him?
Yeah, he actually told me that when he was a kid or a teenager, he suffered from staph infections and some kidney disease. And he would spend a lot of times, sitting in clinics or hospitals, but he much more enjoyed recuperating at home, where he would kind of lie down, and out of the window there was a giant pine tree outside his window that he would look at quite often when he was recovering from his illnesses.
So he went on to become a researcher, and in the early 1980s, he conducted a remarkable study at a hospital in Philadelphia. What did he study and what did he learn?
Yeah, it's a really incredible study, and I would say, one of the most seminal works in kind of environmental psychology. And what Roger did was he studied patient recovery from gallbladder surgery on a single corridor in a hospital in Philadelphia. And what Roger was interested in looking at were the views out of the windows of these hospital rooms. So some of the hospital rooms had some modest views of nature out of the window, like some trees or some shrubs or some grass. But other rooms on this hospital corridor had views of like a brick wall of the other side of the hospital. And Roger was interested in seeing, does the room that people are in and the view that they have out the window have any impact on recovery from gallbladder surgery? And incredibly, he found that patients that had the views of modest nature out of their window recovered about a day earlier from gallbladder surgery compared to the patients who had rooms of a brick wall. In addition, the patients that had the rooms with the nature view, they used less pain medication than the patients that had the views of the brick wall.
Wow.
And, people might be thinking, well, maybe patients who were healthier or younger or wealthier, maybe they got the views of nature and the other patients didn't, but that wasn't the case. These patients were basically randomly assigned to these different hospital rooms. They were just, whatever room was available, that's the room that they got, which is kind of like doing an experiment. And it's just amazing that being randomly assigned to the room that had the modest nature view could speed recovery and also cause people to use less pain medication. Roger was really interested also in stress and stress responses. So he believed that interactions with nature could remediate stress responses, and he thought that was the mechanism behind why interacting with nature was having different beneficial effects.
Over time, many other theories have been advanced about why nature could have positive effects on our minds. One came from the evolutionary biologist E.O. Wilson. He called it the biophilia hypothesis.
So the biophilia hypothesis, in a nutshell, is this idea that humans have an inherent love of nature and the natural world and other living organisms. And these tend to be places that we would say would be very good habitats for humans to live in. And there was actually a researcher, Jay Appleton, who proposed this other theory called prospect refuge theory, that environments that had high prospect, meaning places where you could draw food and water, but also that had high refuge, places where you could kind of hide or be safe, would be the most kind of preferred environments. And that also kind of matches this idea of humans kind of liking natural environments that have a lot of plants and trees, but also water.
As you began to conduct your own research in this field, Mark, you were working with a mentor named Stephen Kaplan. Steve believed that the benefits of exposure to nature had much to do with attention, and he would often talk about how humans have two distinct types of attention. What are these two forms of attention?
Yeah, so Steve coined or developed this hypothesis called the attention restoration theory, and he did this in partnership with his wife Rachel Kaplan. And one of the main tenets of attention restoration theory is that humans have two main kinds of attention. And one kind of attention is called directed attention, and that's the kind of attention where you as the individual person are deciding what to pay attention to. So presumably anybody listening to this show is deciding to pay attention to what we're talking about. And this directed attention is the kind of attention that we use a lot in schools and at work. It's thought to be fatigable or depletable, that you can only sort of direct your attention for so long before you become mentally fatigued and you can't really focus anymore. And we've all had that sensation kind of at the end of a long work day where you might be just staring at the computer screen and nothing's really happening and you just can't focus or concentrate to get your work done. We would call that a directed attention fatigue state, and that's a good time to take a break.
So Steve argued that there was a second form of attention as well. What is the second form?
Right, and the second form of attention Steve called involuntary attention. And that's the kind of attention that's automatically captured by interesting stimulation in the environment. So bright lights, loud noises, they automatically capture our attention and we don't really have any control over it. And it's thought that involuntary attention is less susceptible to fatigue or depletion. And you don't often hear people say, oh, I can't look at that beautiful waterfall anymore, it's just too beautiful, it's too tiring to look at, I have to stop looking at it. So the idea behind attention restoration theory is that if you can find environments that don't place a lot of demands on directed attention, while simultaneously having interesting stimulation that activates the involuntary attention, you can restore or replenish this precious directed attention resource. And we think that a lot of natural environments sort of meet these criteria.
Not all forms of involuntary attention are restorative. Compare the experience of watching ocean waves at a beach, for example, to the experience of walking through Times Square in New York City.
When you're looking at those waves at the ocean, it captures your involuntary attention, but it doesn't really capture all of your attentional resources. You can kind of mind wander and think about other things while you're looking at those waves. When you're walking through Times Square, it's also very interesting. There's a lot of really interesting stimulation in Times Square that automatically captures involuntary attention, but it sort of captures all of your attentional resources. You can't really mind wander or think about other things when you're in Times Square. And Steve and Rachel thought that that kind of stimulation is not really going to be able to rest our directed attention abilities, that it might actually fatigue us even further.
This is a crucial point, and I want to take a second to underline it. Watching a waterfall, or the waves, or the clouds drifting across the sky allows our minds to relax, to wander. These softly fascinating scenes are very different than the harsh demands of being in a hyper-stimulating environment like Times Square. You cannot let your attention wander. You might get bumped into by hordes of tourists or run over by a cab. Scientists have also theorized that natural landscapes and soundscapes are just more easily absorbed by our brains.
There's certain stimulation in the environment that our brains process more fluently, that it's just easier to process certain stimulation. And that's also kind of related to soft fascination, that softly fascinating stimulation might also be sort of easier to process. But what does that really mean? And so we started to try to quantify what it means for different stimulation to be processed more fluently or more easily. And it seems like that seems to be occurring more for natural images versus urban images.
You know, it's interesting, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm able to look out of the window and I'm seeing a tree, and the tree has, probably 5,000 leaves that I can see right now through the window, but of course I'm just taking in all of those leaves in one big bite. I'm not actually noticing that each of those leaves has a different vein structure and the light is hitting that leaf differently. I'm just taking it in as a tree, and that's what you're talking about here.
That's right. Versus in the urban environment, you might actually be cataloging all the different objects, that there's a Volkswagen Beetle, a bicycle, Gothic architecture, and, we're just labeling and quantifying all of that information, which is taking up more room, whereas what you're saying, when you're looking at that tree, you're compressing that representation to just be a tree and not to, something that's got 5,000 little extra parts for every single leaf.
traffic control tower. For NPR News, I'm Nick Della Canal in Charlotte.
Arctic air is moving across much of the country this weekend, bringing cold temperatures from the northern plains to the southeast. The cold snap is likely to last for several days. Some areas will get the first measurable snowfall of the season. This is NPR News. Another typhoon is threatening the Philippines. A state of national emergency is still in effect after a typhoon struck earlier this week. At least 204 people died. The storm also brought fierce winds and torrential rains to Vietnam. 5 people died. Thousands of homes were damaged or destroyed. Known for Yellowstone and Glacier National Park, fans are flocking to Montana for a new outdoor activity. It's all about the bats. Yellowstone Public Radio's Kayla DeRoche reports.
Biologists in central Montana lead a boat tour through Missouri River Canyon. At sunset, thousands of bats swoop from the cliffs down into the valley. State bat biologist Shannon Hilty leads tours.
These sell out now in minutes, to the point where people are mad when they did not get a spot.
Handheld devices amplify the animals' ultrasonic chirps. State wildlife managers say it's important to raise awareness about bats and their vulnerability to threats like disease. They say they save the agricultural industry millions of dollars a year by controlling bug populations. Montana's bat experts are planning more bat observation activities and educational opportunities statewide. For NPR News, I'm Kayla DeRoche in Billings, Montana.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame holds its induction ceremony in Los Angeles tonight. This year's class includes artists from the 1950s through the 2000s. Chubby Checker began in the 50s with The Twist and Let's Twist Again. English singer Joe Cocker began releasing records in the 60s. Warren Zevon sang Werewolves in London in the 1970s. Other artists include Cyndi Lauper, The White Stripes, and Salt and Pepper. I'm Nora Rahm, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Drexel University, whose cooperative education program positions students to explore future careers before graduation. This is experiential education. More at drexel.edu.
From PRX,